Hello, everyone. Hi. Thank you, Rachel Uffner Gallery and Co. for inviting me to moderate this discussion. This was a really lovely show. I'm glad I had some time to spend with it. And I thought that I just love this framework of factors of production. And I thought that we could tease that out during the course of this discussion and kind of like see how far it can go in thinking about both of your processes, which are very different but have these kinds of links that I'm sure you're aware of and others are aware of from just looking at the work. So I thought that we could begin very broadly with the kind of economic term, factors of production, which as you see in the press release refers to this economic term for basically all the stuff that goes into creating a product that sells. So profit is definitely a part of that. So land, labor, capital, and enterprise. So I think about capitalist commerce coming out of that. And I'm wondering if we could just begin there with this concept of the factors of production as it relates to economy, and thinking about how you're trying to intervene within that discourse through your practices. So this is just a broad question about how you relate your work to commerce and economics.
Yeah, well, as I was making this work, and thanks for being here, by the way. This is definitely a treat. Thank you all for coming again. As I was making the work, I was thinking about flattening economies in terms of how painting, drawing, and printmaking are types of economies. And also relating that to one of the factors of production, one of the things that I think America produces is culture. And one of the factors of culture is how do we treat one another, our sense of humanity. And in that, there are hierarchies and a sense of relationships that factor into how we produce culture that's exported, globally. And so that being said, there are hierarchies within art processes. There's a perception of that as painting is maybe higher, maybe it has a more sense of an aura, and printmaking and drawing may be a little bit lower on that ladder. But in terms of art making, they all have a sense of process that's methodical and labor intensive by varying degrees, even though the price point for those may not be equivocal to how much labor is being involved. So in making the work, make a long story short, is that I'm flattening those economies. I'm making them all relevant, all relational, and making painting, drawing, and printmaking all exist on the same plane. And making that kind of metaphor along with the hierarchies that are perceived in society. That you have the haves and the have-nots. One's suburbs, others projects, but I would tend to say that separate isn't equal, but that difference is equal. So the fact that people are different doesn't mean that one is better or worse than the other. The fact that painting, drawing, and printmaking are different doesn't make one higher or lower than the other.
Yeah, that's great. When I first saw the show, I was thinking about the cultural aspect of the flattening and the erosion of hierarchies, but I also definitely see that in terms of the hierarchies of medium within the art world and how those are both cohering at the same time, which was a later question for you. Yeah. We'll get back to no. That's great because it's nice to learn that those are being thought of like equally within the same practice. Yeah. Tahir?
Yeah, I think about sort of like the factors of production in my work quite a lot. But more specifically about sourcing materials and how we source materials and the socioeconomic repercussions of that. And so this body of work strata is really to do with like how we acquire cobalt to make renewable, like not renewable energy, but like rechargeable batteries, like the lithium-ion batteries in our phones, and also Tesla cars and so on, and how we acquire it to make these sort of like contemporary technologies to advance society kind of comes from this very dark extraction method that rips countries apart, and how we just sort of haven't weaned ourselves off of colonial and like neo-colonial sort of ideals of like getting materials. And so cobalt is such. And I think, to segue into your next question, I think a lot about what materials are allowed to be art and what should be considered art. And coming from Africa, born and raised in Nairobi, our traditional materials aren't necessarily canvas and oil and all these types of materials that are associated with the Western canon. And how do I sort of like marry sort of like this concept of like the materials used in the making of art in terms of how does the process kind of discuss the narrative I'm bringing up, but then also discuss the value of the materials that I'm using, and so use raffia, which is a palm-based product, to make these sort of almost tapestry-like, and what you're really looking at are just these like large experiments of like how cobalt oxide actually interacts with this particular material.
Right, then so could we take a step back and have both of you just explain what the process of making your works are in this room? Because I think that's helpful since they have the process carries conceptual weight, understanding how that came to be I think would be useful.
Yeah, so I like to tear things up and put them back together again. I don't know why. But so basically this is about construction, deconstruction, and then reconstruction. I'm also, again, playing with the interrelationships between painting, drawing, and printmaking. So, I'll make an assemblage that's made out of detritus. It's canvas and string and plastic, and then it gets inked, and then run on a press with paper on top. And so then the kind of language of that, the topography of the surface, is then related to the paper. So I guess assemblage and painting becomes a means to an end. Like I'm not really interested in that as a painting anymore. I'm interested in how that relates to paper. And so I guess in a way it's the essence of the painting is being transferred over onto the paper. So that's one part. Then the other part is actually, actually painting on paper using charcoal. So is charcoal a drawing element? Is it a painting element? But using charcoal in this kind of very kind of fluid manner creates this gap between painting and drawing. And then also printmaking on top of that. And then that's torn apart and then reassembled again. And so then you have this kind of amalgamation of, it can't be extrapolated. What's printmaking, what's drawing, what's painting. And then there's a social model relevance to that. I don't know if I should talk about it now, but
yes, you can talk about it.
So he's a kind of a theorist. His name's Edouard Glissant, and he talks about these social models and the differences between kind of the singular identity and the plural identity. And the metaphor he makes is that a tree, if you can imagine what a tree looks like, it's singular and has a root system. And he makes that comparison with a rhizome. The rhizome has a lateral root system. So when you look at a rhizome plant, all the shoots, the things that are sticking out of the ground, are sharing the same root system. So it's each individual is related, right? And so I just thought that was so cool in that identity then is a relational kind of thing. It's not transparent to the dominant culture. It's opaque. So I am who I am, and you are who you are, but we're related, right? We're sharing the same root system. So in making the work, I'm not thinking about this when I'm making it, right? I'm not thinking about anything actually. I'm listening to Jimi Hendrix or Queens or something. But then after I make a few pieces, I start to see how there's a social relevance to, and a contemporary relevance to what I'm making. So this idea of the rhizome having this lateral root system and that we're all related coincides with all the pieces in the collage, like relating together on one flat surface, that there's not this sense of hierarchy.
Tahir, if you're interested in the kind of flattening, Cullen, I'm interested in your layering technique as kind of approaching something like that,
Right.
an accumulation of historical experience or of human experience, of time in general. So can you talk about your practice and how these works
How these like
come to be? Yeah.
So layering is something like very common in my practice, and you just see a lot, and it's sort of like this visual cue that I sort of hope people understand is that it's not what you're looking at it's more than what it is. Like it's not just the sort of just its affect, like its visual affect, that there is more to the story, and there are layers that unfold and that fold in and have sort of stories and narratives behind them. And that's just how I approached sort of like making in general, and that also sort of translates into like how I actually stain and dye these, and how I also try to emulate the material that I'm using, or like how it's presented to me as well. Like the battery is like all layered in, and like it's all like folded, and it has this sort of like meandering dance within that little tablet. And so these are made sort of using raffia, of course, and I acquire cell phone batteries, like dead cell phone batteries that people try to get rid of off eBay, and some of my own, and some of the batteries that my friends have. And I open the battery and unravel sort of the copper and the aluminium strip. The aluminium sort of has this sort of like graphite coating to it, and the lithium, and then the cobalt is around the copper itself. And so I need to strip off the cobalt from this is not safe, just like don't do this. I do it.
Do you have to take safety precautions during that, or is it just?
I'm very Ibahesa about it. I try my best, but then sometimes you just end up making things and it's not dirty. I do sort of, it's heavy metal poisoning that you can get from it.
Right.
So I try to make sure that there are plenty of days that I'm just like not interfacing with the material. So I'm just poisoning myself slowly over time.
Well, I mean, it's hardening to the inherent danger of
Yes.
mining those materials to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what appears green, these stains, these dyes, is actually the cobalt. And it's sort of like how the copper itself, so when you open it, it kind of like combusts and oxidizes. And so the copper also will release a little bit of green as it patinas, and also the cobalt oxide does have that color, but it appears very black on the strip. And then as I remove it and mix it with water and slowly sort of like paint these layers and layers and layers and layers and layers of dye onto it, and so it's like slowly dyed over time. And they all the different parts of what makes one piece is all different dyeing processes that I've tried to develop and make myself, and not necessarily sort of treat the raffia how you would traditionally treat it, like in the Congo or other parts of Africa, because you need to boil the fabric with a specific root so that it can take the color easier. But because of the dangers of boiling all of these things and like doing that, I just decided that how I would do it is by like adding these layers and having this very sort of laborious process to do it. And then once I have all of these like strips, I then compose them, and it's very much sort of how I feel and like how I decide, or how the material tells me it can go. Because raffia is very like stiff, and so it doesn't like you can force it to do something, but it often just doesn't listen to you. So you have to work with the material and then sew it together and then pin it and then try to get these sort of like layers to speak with each other.
Yeah, so both of you, I mean, I asked you about a process, so you didn't just talk about process, but both of you have talked about the process as kind of like essential to the meaning of the work, whether that be the process of sourcing the materials, deconstructing the battery, dyeing the raffia, and in your case, Cullen, drawing upon different printmaking and painting techniques to kind of make a product that is an amalgamation of all those parts and erodes those distinctions. And I guess thinking about factors of production, I'm wondering about the product and the thing that exists at the end of the process, what we see here and what a person who did not know the backstory of how it came to be wouldn't necessarily know upon looking at the work.
Great.
And obviously, that is a legacy of, postmodern art making practices, where process kind of takes precedence over product, or not necessarily. So I guess my question is, what is the product itself for you? So a viewer who comes and experiences your amalgamation of printmaking techniques, your raffia semi-sculptures, what is the product as distinct from the process? I know that's a very difficult question because they can't be separated, but maybe it's a question about kind of the experiential. What is somebody to gain from seeing it in real time?
Yeah. No, I think work exists in kind of two states. The initial state when the viewer kind of first sees it, and then the state of the backstory. So the initial is, I think of as like a blind date, right? You don't know anything about this person. There's no history, and you just kind of, he or she looks good, and so on and so forth. So that being said, I think the element of seduction, I think, is important. It's the element of beauty. It's almost this ineffable, right? You look at something, and sometimes there's this automatic connection with, like, you make eye contact, like with the work, and it speaks to you. And so I love when that happens, right? It's like hearing a song for the first time, and either you like it or you don't, based upon whatever criteria. And so I think color and movement, and I think there's certain things that can't really be said at that point that really hooks the viewer, and then they have this I want to stay and find out more moment about the work, which is cool. And then the second is, finding out the backstory, finding out, like, how did they do this? Then the cerebral kind of kicks in. I think the first part is the emotive. It's emotion, and you feel something, and then the second part is the cerebral. Then you want to know, well, how is it made, and who's the artist, and oh, that looks interesting. But I'm not sure if that's the initial kind of hook that brings a person in. So having them exist as these beautiful things, I think, is nothing wrong with that. That's the way I see them, actually.
Do you see them as, because I know that you've talked about kind of the city square as this meeting point and as reflective of your interest in, I don't want to say cosmopolitanism maybe, but something approximating that, where all kinds of people from various places come together and exist in a single space.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that in relation to the work because the work isn't diagrammatic, but it approximates a kind of energy or something like that that you'd associate with a city. So do you see, but that's kind of getting towards representational, which I know that you're not interested in, but how do you see the work referencing the human?
Yeah, no, it's the city square, I think, is the nexus of humanity. And I was in the San Marcos Square in Venice, and this sense of expanse, right? This sense of expansion, and then to enrich that sense of expansion, they had the columns on the facade of the building. And so the repetition of form accentuated that sense of expanse. And then you have the horizon, and then the ceiling is the sky. So inside the sense of rigidity is this void space where people are fluidly moving around, which was just so exciting for me. And at the time, I couldn't articulate what I was feeling, and I experienced it when I was making Agora 1, that piece. So they're titled Agoras because Agora is the Greek word for city square. It was the first city squares in Greece, and it was a meeting place where people hashed out issues. And so then it became this very kind of important component part of city planning in Europe, where you had to have a city square. And so the square became the setting for the play of humanity, right? And so you had the good, the bad, and the ugly. You had executions took place, market exchange, people watching, military pageantry. You had all these things kind of happening in the city square. And so I thought, how appropriate that it be this metaphor for humanity, because, you know, it's kind of unromantic, right? It's not always a story about the hero. It's just like aspects of characters of people interacting. But it also was all types of people interacting within the same thing. So in making the work, I thought about how that was such a great metaphor for having the work be relatable to humanity, but also having it be what I think of as these non-representational fields of activity. That's the way I see them. It's not any particular thing, therefore it could be anything. But it's still this field of activity where things can happen, just like in the square.
Right, so yeah, so the quasi-canvas as a space of fields, many fields of activity happening at once.
Yeah.
Tahir?
What do I think about the making of the object itself?
The product, after you've made it, and it's now a sculpture.
Right.
Though maybe a painting.
And some of that, like some of the newer ones, are starting to look a little bit more like paintings in the same way.
So how do you reconcile the process of making it and the meaning that goes into the history of the elements of making it versus once it, it doesn't need to be a gallery wall, it can even be a studio wall. Once it's a made thing and it's a coherent whole, what is that to you in relationship to the process of having made it?
I think it's a harmony of the materials.
Okay.
And I think that it's me listening to, again, just like listening to the materials, but then also for sort of the viewer to walk in and not knowing the story, and not knowing where this is from or made up to. Like they will get this sort of idea around landscapes and like earth, and you'll see sort of these like moments of like ridges in some of the works. And this collection of work is gold strata, which is very much to do with the rock strata and how we look at history and determine which materials appear when in history and what happens. And so thinking about recurring materials and thinking about sort of like recurring histories as well, and relating that to the landscape, and that's obviously to do with like the layers that you see. So like how these sort of textiles are sort of floating, but also like falling into each other, and then also how the landscape, so like these ideas of ridges and mountains like sort of appear, but also very human in a way that they are textiles and they are things that you can wear, and some of them kind of present like little beds or canoes or like things that you can lay in, or things that like are holding, or like pockets and bits and pieces from there. And it's this idea of like hiding and then also exposing. But very much a lot about my practice with abstraction really does deal with looking at aerial views of the orthotic landscapes, and also like cross sections of like earth. So not necessarily just only looking at the mountains, but also like the cross section of the earth. So you can see some of that on the top of this one, and like how that does look like the little bit ridges, but also stains, or like evidence of craft. Very warped. so that it doesn't seem so scary to approach.
Yeah, I guess that relates to a question I had about kind of the square and the grid and these kinds of like regimented ways of understanding a cityscape or just the globe, modernity as organized through these kind of mathematical principles, and that both of you are avoiding the square and kind of just letting it have authority either through these kind of organic shapes or by putting them together to make a kind of, quasi-rectangular. There's never any true square present in either of the works, which is kind of an aside, but I wanted to ask about use value, playing off of this factors of production framework. And what struck me about your work, Tahir, is that looking at the three pieces, so I noticed that this is strata 4, rigorous, yes. So you mentioned the pockets, so there's a sense of it having a use value of holding, of carrying, of transporting materials, etc. And then you look at strata 1, and then there isn't really that pocket anymore.
Right.
And then we get to Stargazer, which has kind of like completely removed, I think, an option of use, which I thought was quite interesting, and that there's this this tension between raffia as this material that has a market function, but within this aesthetic context, it's kind of like it's been rendered useless and thus having a different use. I guess I'm wondering a bit more about your choice of material here, and if you think that if you're interested in kind of the economy of agriculture or what have you that a raffia would be involved with versus the art world.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I specifically use raffia because, raffia can be used for like sacks and upholstery and like certain it is very utilitarian, but it's also used to create artwork as well across the Congo and Madagascar and also Kenya. And it is often dyed and like turned into kubo cloth, and it goes through a process to make it more like a cloth. And some of this is like the raw raffia that isn't sort of like beaten into a cloth, and some of it is. Some of them from pygmy villages and kuba villages and like different parts of the Congo. But raffia, for me, and kuba cloth really was the inspiration for like the material that I'm using, because the way it's dyed and the way it has this sort of like spiritual relevance to the Kuba people as well. But then also how that is the region that's being affected by the cobalt mining. And to sort of marry these two materials is like one being very sort of aggressive and almost parasitic to the Congo, and the other something that sort of is, like every institution has like an ancient Kuba cloth like thing there, like piece in their collection, that from the Met to anywhere.
Brooklyn Museum?
Brooklyn Museum. From the Met to the this material. So this material is both used as something that can be a wallwork, can be clothes, can be utilitarian. And so you see sort of strata 1 with it sort of like holding the secret, so you can't really look inside the pockets, it's sort of pregnant. And with strata 4, you can see all of these like openings where you can put things in. Where with Stargazer, it's more sort of the idea and like my mind, and it's kind of like how the layers are sort of like folded in. So there are pockets in it, it's just how it's pulled open.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
so if you see it from the top, you'll see all of these little bits and pieces of pocket, but then it's also what sort of creates the this sort of like cradle effect.
Mhm.
It's very strong, surprisingly.
Oh, you mean, yeah, I was like, yeah, this is strong work. You mean actually physically? Yeah.
Yeah, it's very strong. It's physically, yeah, it's a strong, I mean, it's only the hemp strings that are actually weak, but if you actually get like a stronger fiber, you could actually probably cradle something this weak.
Mhm.
Yeah.
That's, so at first glance, you thinking across your materials, they seem wildly different to me, especially because with your work, Cullen, the color rate paper in particular, it's like and the tape, there's this kind of almost industrial aspect to it that is the kind of contrast to what appears to be a natural, wholly natural material. And I guess I'm wondering about the processes of making those materials that then get folded into your process. So I'm wondering about if you're interested in kind of like the industry of tape making and paper making and all of the things that you collate in order to make your printing practice.
I'm interested.
Painting practice, yeah.
I'm like interested in cheap materials. It's funny because someone came in my studio and they're like, "Why do you have all this tape?" So it's like it's my paint, but because it's immediate, and so when I make a mark with tape, it's down. That's it. Now the tape is not taped. In other words, there's another adhesive that's holding it, so that you just couldn't just like rip it off. But I think this idea of economy and efficiency is very present. And I think that's more or less at any level or strata, if I can borrow any strata of process and capitalism, right? It's how efficient can we make this thing? And so there's this illusion of that it's maybe haphazardly like put together, but that's not the case. So yeah, and I try not to make, there's no illusion to that. I mean, you can read color aid on the back of the paper that's folded over. I try to not create a sense of mystery or a false narrative that it's something that it's not. And so the evidence of the process is there. And I think when I initially started making this type of work, it just became kind of natural for the evidence of process to be just as important as the end result of that process. And so it just, I don't know, it was effective. And so since I'm using colored tape, then, that's cool. Some of the, like the black on this area, the black squares is made by cardboard. So that's cardboard that's wrapped with yarn. And so it made a mark. It's in service to make a mark. And it's left over from a previous body of work when I was thinking about theories of nature that are unpredictable, like chaos and entropy and things of that nature. So, and also how atoms are made. So I was thinking about string theory, and so I started wrapping pieces of cardboard with string and then printing it. And so that kind of carried over into this body of work. So just anything that I could find usually that's around me was accessible. And most things get recycled too. So there's hardly anything that's thrown away in the studio. It's like a little ecosystem or ecosystem. And there's certain items I think that have what I think of as entryways for the viewer. Like in this one, there's a CD. And so to me, I'm thinking about it formally. Like that's not a CD to me, that's a circle. But for someone who may not have an extensive vocabulary with abstraction, it may be a way for them to enter into the work and say, oh, I know what that is, and therefore begin to have this conversation with something that otherwise would just be totally like abstract.
Right, and both of you, and drawing off that, both of you are thinking about the actual material processes that go into abstraction, because they can never really be separated from, you know, the CD case becomes the circle, the battery that is deconstructed to become the pigment.
Right.
And you were just speaking about recycling, Cullen, that recalled for me, Tahir, when your actual process of recycling batteries and then kind of reorganizing them to return to its origins in a way that's kind of like reverential as opposed to predatory.
Mm.
So being able to do that through the use of the battery in this new context. Yeah, and I guess I was also just thinking about the thread, because I love that yellow, it's yellow and red string that's kind of sitting at the surface. And I thought that was like a wonderful kind of material moment where there was some overlap in an otherwise disparate feel between the two of your works. So I guess another question that I had was about color, because I think that is an immediate difference one would have, experiential difference one would have with both of your works upon first seeing them, and I'm really interested in these like super bright green, red, yellows that you have going on, Cullen, and how that seems so removed from the natural and what we think about as a human, I'm saying this so poorly, a human related pigment. You know, it's not brown, it's not darker yellows, et cetera, et cetera. But one color that is more or less missing, save for a couple of pieces of tape, is blue. And I was thinking about cobalt, in your case, Tahir, and yeah, which obviously is used to make the cobalt pigment. And yeah, I guess I'm wondering about coloration and blue.
Right.
And both of your practices kind of like staying away from it.
Yeah. That's weird.
There are moments that I do get blues sometimes, but it's not, I mean, raffia is yellow, so if you add blue to yellow, you're going to get green no matter what. It depends on like how I apply it. Yeah, I don't know, I need to get a lot of batteries to get blue into the raffia.
Yeah.
But sometimes if I actually, sort of leave like the cobalt, the copper strip onto the raffia for an extended period of time while it's wet, it can sort of like burn very dark blue. You can see that over there, but it doesn't really read as blue because it's kind of like covered with all of these greens. There's like this line that's like there. That sort of like gets it. But yeah, no, blue isn't really something. I tried to get blue. I like applied the cobalt oxide to pottery, and I made glazes from it to try to like get the blue into it. But it's very hard.
Yeah.
In the future, there will be
laborious
blue.
to be
Yeah.
able to produce this.
But then you can also get the blue patina from the copper if I mix it with vinegar and salt,
Cullen blue.
You know, I was trying to think of a rule. At first I was going to say, well, I'm using primary colors, but that's not the case. Because then that means I have green there. But, I mean, colors I thought was just something I needed to use. I've been scared of color. And I was making work that wanted to live without this element of seduction, that I wanted people to stay with work based upon the sense of construction, and then it was a good compositional piece. And then I shifted into color, and I don't know, I was looking at Kandinsky actually, I was looking at Malevich, and so just optically looking at their work, I was drawn to it, and it began to influence like some of the work I was making at the time. And then, you know, in further reading, you know, that, you know, Mondrian, they chose color for a very specific reason in terms of, you know, just for purity. And they were trying to relate to how the world has this other layer of it not being material and it not being mundane. And so how do they get to that? They get to something at its primal state. And so they chose these primary colors, or these very elemental colors. And so that kind of way of thinking appealed to me, and it affirmed some of my belief systems. And so I integrated color into the work. I liked it. It just kind of worked. I do see it, going back to what you were saying, I do see it as a metaphor for humanity, in that it's not racial, in that race is a socially constructed, you know, it's like fog. It's there, but you can't really grasp it. But nonetheless, it can stop you from seeing. It can stop you from seeing who someone really is. It can fog your vision, but at the same time, it's not real. So the fact that I'm using these colors as metaphors for humanity, and that they're not racial colors, is really trying to get to what's lying underneath, you know, who we all are. And so that other kind of connective tissue that goes against what is separating us, right? We look at a person and we see a facade, we look at how they dress and their skin color, and we make a judgment based on that. But that may not be who that person really is. On top of that, you're also related to that person, which becomes very apparent when you travel, right? It's like, I know for me, when I leave the States, I realize how much of an American I am. And it seems like another American will find you. When you're in another country, like, I'm so glad to see you, you know what I mean? And so this shift of this dynamic shift happens, where in the States that person probably would have never spoken to you, but our colors have shifted. Now I'm not brown, I'm red, white, and blue, right? And so now there's this relationship that begins to happen. So.
Yeah, just when you were speaking about that reminded me of flags and how these colors are often found in national flags. So there's something about that too. And I don't have a thought further, but I just...
No, that's amazing. I mean, when I went to Venice and came back, I threw green in. Right, because it was in the flag, and it says red, white, and green. So.
So this is a question that was my second question, but I'll ask now. We kind of circled back to it as you were speaking, Cullen, and my question's about utopia. I wonder if you think of, let me back up. Tahir, it seems to me that in your practice with these works, you're drawing attention to processes of capitalism that render certain populations vulnerable. And these works, to me, feel like a kind of redress to that process. And Cullen, I feel like your work is about attempting to create a space where the hierarchies that also govern the ones that Tahir is also interested in become obsolete. And I wonder if you think of your work as engaging in kind of utopic work, of looking towards a desirable kind of system of organization that would actually result in the equality that it seems like both of you are interested in to some extent. So are you thinking about utopia, about world making, about these kinds of like alternative ways of economies, new factors of production?
That's a great question. It's a fantastic question, yeah.
I think about it all the time. I mean, I think about automation a lot recently, especially like how this has become sort issue with regards to, I mean, all the people who just like don't want automation, also people who like want coal mining to come back in fashion. And I think about where technology, like what are the pains that we have to go through for technology to advance before it gets to a stage that we can actually reach some kind of utopic like society. But at the same time, like we also have to think about like capitalism and how it works in sort of like keeping certain things down, and to make sure that there is this sort of class and like hierarchy and all, and like how it is, it's not necessarily designed, the market isn't sort of like consciously like making these decisions as well. There's also like, there are a lot of like social issues behind this. One of this like race and like where people come from, and more specifically with strata, it's like to do with Africa. But I do think about how far technology could take us and what are the pains that we have to go through before it could actually make any adjustments. But then also thinking about like how will automation really sort of like help it, like how will automation sort of like change our society. I'm working on another project at the moment with a lot to do with sort of factories in China and like suicide. And to think about like people who have to make these phones in these like very terrible environments, so they commit suicide very often. And how like automation could solve a lot of these sort of like problems, and whether, you know, it's very complicated. I had a long discussion with a friend of mine about this yesterday, but yeah, I do think about it a lot. I don't know how I can approach making one. Really do try.
Yeah. Oh, I'm glad you went first. Gave me time to think about it.
I prepped this presentation.
No, you know, I think there are different types of utopias. There's a utopia for different groups of people. You may hear some people say, you know, how good it was in the good old days, but yet the good old days may not have been good old days for other groups, and so I think, you know, a utopia is this place of perfection, almost, where everything's flat. Again, I'm thinking about how hierarchies are flattened, and so those economies are flattened. And so if that's the case, then again, difference is equal.